The Old Testament bears witness to the God of grace, who loves his people and keeps calling them back to himself as well. But I think here the apostle wants to communicate, well, let's call it a sense of place. That place in which we now live, one where God is present in Jesus the Christ. I'd like to use an image, I think that it comes from Edward Schweitzer, of atmosphere. You know how we sometimes say, that home has a good atmosphere. That people who live here are happy to be part of it. Of course, there are homes that feel claustrophobic. Places where you can hardly breathe, that make you feel uncomfortable. Father and mother, parents and children may bicker constantly. And you feel the tension. You go in other homes where there's a healthy, peaceful, warm atmosphere in which you feel that you can thrive. So the apostle might be said to say something like this. Because Jesus walked the roads of Palestine, preached the presence of God's rule, and embodied it as the shape of his own ministry, and died on the cross, and because God has raised him from the dead, the atmosphere in which we live has become entirely new. This is the reality that comes to expression in the church assembly of worship. Even though the consummation of our hope still stands at the very end of our journey, faith at the same time makes that hope in some sense real and present, so that the apostle can say, it's as if we're already rejoicing with those who have attained the goal. We live in an environment that is determined by the lordship of Jesus Christ, where God seeks to put an end to strife and to misunderstanding. Our gathering for worship is an expression of the reality that we are in a continuous process of receiving that kingdom, that rule, that new world. In this assembly, God would like for us to breathe deeply of that new atmosphere. Just so that you and I may live in a way that reflects this new home. A place that's good for us in every way, where we are loved and affirmed and encouraged. If our assembly responds to the preaching of the kingdom is that of worship, and that is good for us, it also shapes us in a way of living in God's world. It is the source and center of all Christian mission. If that last word of the apostle seems overly tough, think of it this way. The last word of the apostle is to warn and encourage us about living in that new situation. The people in the church, whether then or now, are neither angels or even half angels for that matter. But we know certain types of behavior are no longer possible. We may cling to a host of things, but they need not possess us. As Edward Schweitzer once put it, we may understand little about the meaning of Jesus Christ, but at least we know this much. A human life has been lived on this earth that no longer centers in or revolves around its own self, but gives itself away for the sake of others. Herbert W. Chilstrom, a former presiding bishop of our church, reminds us that the Gospels are full of difficult examples of the shape of the life of those who follow Jesus Christ. Some of them quite hard-hitting, like the one in Luke. Everyone to whom much is given, of him much will be required. Or in the parable of the talents, the biting words to the one who buries his talent, you wicked and slothful servant, he is called. And Chilstrom argues that we should not overlook those places that speak about the responsibilities of the Christian way. Even Henry Melchior Muhlenberg, that revered patriarch of Lutherans in the United States, and particularly in Pennsylvania, seemed to be worried about the church's commitment. He said at one time, the church in Pennsylvania was like a man who fell among thieves. It was half dead. Our worship ought to be a challenge to us, to bring us back to life. Or that gospel text for the day. Just think about how in that story of Jesus' healing this bent-over woman and the subsequent controversy with the synagogue leader, how Jesus' dealings in all of that kind of undermines insistence on the law at the cost of the neighbor. This week I listened to a discussion of this story, and one of the commentators suggested that, we inherit traditions that can make us very anxious when we try to imagine something new. And he wondered if the discussion in the church of those issues that perplex us so much, like the issues of sexuality and divorce and gender rules, didn't actually fit this kind of situation. If the system causes you to miss the need of people, then something is misunderstood. We have to think anew then about who God is, and what God is for, and what God wants for human society. So when we worship, we place ourselves publicly before God to acknowledge together who God is for us and who we must be for him. In the liturgy, we open our lives to God in praise and commitment, to learn how to follow God's ways in a world which often seems to want to block those ways. To stand up against injustice when the occasion demands it, to feed the hungry, to welcome the stranger, to dare to hope, to live with joy, knowing that every moment of our lives we must act out, we must embody, we must incarnate what we have already done in our worship, what we continue to do in and through